knowledge rich is important, but it results in technologically, vocationally, and emotionally poor. And we have to rebalance that.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Hello, once again, my fathomless friends. Welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast, Education's critical friend. Our friends at Ofsted have been in the news a lot recently, as you may have noticed. And recently, a very interesting report was published, an inquiry that was chaired by Lord Jim Knight, the Beyond Ofsted inquiry. And in this episode, I had the opportunity to speak with Jim for quite some time about the Ofsted inquiry and the recommendations in it, and we put them to the test a little bit. It was a very interesting conversation, and I'm very grateful to Jim for giving up his time to do so. Before we get into the conversation, I would like to share with you an offer, Christmas offer in this Christmassy time. I can never work out which way to lean when I'm in the mirror. This week saw the launch of a resource that I've been working on for the last 4 years or so. It's called Activate, and it's designed to help teachers and leaders promote self-regulated learning, or what some people, especially over the Welsh border, refer to as learner effectiveness. And it's out, it's launched now. It's this beautiful box. The Crown House, the publishers, have done an amazing job of making it look beautiful. And it's out now. It's a card-based resource, and it costs 35 quid. But you can get £10 off if you use the promo code ACTIVATE before January the 5th. So get yourself a copy of Activate and promote self-regulated learning among your learners. Right, that is the plug out of the way. I will now get myself out of the way and hand over to my conversation, which took place just a few hours ago with Lord Jim Knight. Hope you enjoy the show.
Let's rethink education.
Lord Jim Knight, welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted.
I'm delighted to have you. Can I ask you about that, but out of interest? We don't have to keep this in if you don't want, but the Lord thing, it must be quite surreal being called a Lord. How do you find that?
It is surreal. It's not. It wasn't part of my life plan. But I mean, the reality was in 2010 when I lost my seat in Dorset as an MP in the general election, and then the Prime Minister offers you a job for life in the House of Lords. You're a bit mad not to take it. And then, I've had 13 years to get used to it. And as long as people carry on calling me Jim, I don't really mind.
Yes, indeed. I'm imagining that your daughter doesn't
no
bow down to you or anything.
No, my daughter. I mean, I've got a son, a daughter, and a stepdaughter, and none of them are desperately subservient or respectful. They are appropriately behaved for people of their various ages, so it's fine.
That's good to hear. And so your name is Lord, but also it says in some places Baron Jim Knight. Is that the same thing? What's the deal there?
It's the same thing. So when you get made a life peer, you are made a baron or a baroness.
Right.
But the sort of the collective noun is a lord.
I see. Right. Okay. There you go. Interesting. All right. Anyway, thank you for indulging me in that. So you've been busy of late, as you may have noticed. I've certainly noticed you popping up here, there, and everywhere because of the Beyond Ofsted inquiry, which you chaired, and which has gone down really well with people. It seems there's lots of support for your recommendations, which I imagine you're pleased with.
Yeah, I'm really happy. In some ways, I'm surprised that there wasn't a bit more pushback, or it might just be that I'm existing in my own bubble, and there's a huge amount of pushback, and I just haven't heard it. But I think, I mean, obviously the shocking death of Ruth Perry is a backdrop to people's thinking and emotional response to all of this, and I think the public overwhelmingly are now ready for some change. It's not that they don't want accountability, and it's not that I don't, or schools don't want accountability, but people recognise that trying to improve something with a culture of fear and name and shame isn't necessarily the best way of doing it. And in fact, if people can find better ways of doing it, then we should be doing that, and that's what I hope we've done.
Indeed, yes. And so you were asked to write this report a year ago, weren't you? And that was before the Ruth Perry story broke. And so, how did that come to pass? Who asked you to do it, and why?
Well, the then Joint General Secretary Mary Bousted met me for lunch at St Pancras Station. It was one of those amusing occasions where she had arrived before me and got seated, and I arrived, and the person at the desk didn't know that Mary had arrived, so sat me at a different table, and then we both wondered where the other one was. But after about half an hour, we worked it out. So then we had a shorter meeting than we were planned, but Mary put it to me that they wanted this work to be done, and that they thought that I would be the right person to head it up. And beyond the flattery, I think by then I'd been roughly 18 months chairing a multi-academy trust. We'd had a lot of inspections. We'd had quite a lot of inconsistency in the quality of the inspections that we'd received across our schools. You know, we probably had on average something like one a month. I felt really busy with inspection. And so I had a strong sense that there was a problem that needed to be looked at, and that it was quite important that we look at it. Now, my feeling was that there would be a report that would be more about trying to persuade people of the case for change than exactly what the change would be. But following Ruth Perry's death and the public reaction to that, it was then suddenly much more about the practicality of, well, what could we do differently, and what could we do better? Because I think overnight the case for change had been made, really, and that in a way made the job a bit easier.
Yeah, it's so strange, isn't it? The way that a number of things have come together. The inquiry, as you say, was sort of the wheels were already in motion, and then the tragic situation at Caversham Primary School, and the fact that the current chief inspector is outgoing and the new person is coming in January. The IPPR just published a report that touched on this. It was sort of half about inspections. I'm part of a group which is called the Education Policy Alliance, which is also looking at this. And actually, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it'll be pushback, but I'd definitely like to ask you some questions about. Let's get into the details as to what's in this report, and we'll because it's important. You know, if there is an opportunity here, and it does feel like things are aligning to make some change, we want to make sure that we get this thing right. And so there was one thing that caught my eye. One of the first things that caught my eye in reading the report, which is where you said in your introduction that we ask too much of Ofsted. And I think that that's an important point to make. There's lots of people who are very critical about Ofsted, that it's tin-eared, or that it's sort of that acts with impunity. And there's all of these very serious sort of things that are thrown at it, the accusations and what have you. But I think that if you just look at what that organization is tasked with doing, and in some cases what it is tasked itself with doing, the remit is just so broad that it's like it's not able to fulfill its most essential roles, which is around safeguarding. As you know, as they say, you know, the reason that they failed Caversham and gave it an inadequate rating was because of safeguarding. But that was the first time that Ofsted had been to that school in 11 years. And so if safeguarding is so important, then why are you leaving it 11 years? And even if the average is 4 years, that's too long as well. Like if you've had a change of leadership, like the culture of a school can change on a hairpin. And so it feels like it's overstretched, and that it's being asked to do too much, and that it needs to be sort of focused down a bit. And I think that that's an important point.
Yes, a lot of overall what we were trying to say is that we need a duty of care in the system. And in that context, I felt it was really important to think of the people who work at Ofsted from top to bottom, actually, as humans, and as people who we had a duty of care to in our report. And so I had to try and be empathetic and try and understand how we got to this position.
Yeah.
And once I was able to do that, you kind of go, yeah, this is actually quite obvious. If 20 years ago you had a dozen people spending a week, and now you have 2 or 3 spending a day and a half, and the stakes are higher now than they were then. And we're also asking Ofsted to do a lot more besides. Of course, the system's fallen over. Of course, it's not consistent anymore. Of course, it's become hugely problematic and inhuman in its impacts.
Yeah.
That's not all Ofsted's fault. It's poorly resourced, and what Amanda Spielman would say is, and there's lots that she said that I think has been misjudged, but I think she has been right to say that how the department then uses an Ofsted judgment for accountability purposes is not their concern. Their concern is to do the job that they've been asked to do, and in her judgment, they've been doing it well. I disagree, but the link with accountability, she's right, is a political decision made by the department.
Yes, yeah, and I think that people aren't often particularly clear on that point, that Ofsted isn't the regulator of schools, that the DfE is the regulator, and they just report to the regulator. And for example, some of the people who are currently saying, just pause Ofsted, just stop it now, I don't think that that's going to work for that reason, that it would be potentially illegal. It would be a serious safeguarding concern if the safeguarding, if the body that reports on safeguarding to the regulator is just stopped in its tracks. That's not going to work, even though you can see why people are making that case. And so, yeah, that's a good point. And of course, they're not bad actors. What's that phrase? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think that they are well intended, but just overstretched. And if you look at some of the research reports that they do, and they've written reports on knife crime and like all kinds of things, and you just sort of think like it's just spread way too thin. And like you say, the absolute visible thinning out in terms of the length of time of an inspection, the number of people involved in it, and how frequently those things are happening. Plus, the current framework is very subjectively interpreted. It's not because it's not so tied to data. It's much more up to the interpretation of the inspection team, it seems.
Yeah, and I've tried to think a little bit about that. Because, like others, I'm attracted to what people call the school report card, which is not a phrase I desperately like. It feels a bit trite in a way, but but the idea that you are more transparent about publishing the outcomes in terms of data, and that perhaps we think about what we're measuring more precisely, and then it's not just about attainment, but it can be about a range of other things that we decide are important.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to feel a little bit about like the previous framework, where there was some valid criticism of that being overly dependent on the data. And that's one of the reasons, several reasons, why we're then talking about having a human narrative attached to the data from the school improvement partner.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to think about both. At present, we're worrying about the outcomes and the inputs, and such a large part of the current framework is about inspecting what happens in the classroom, what the professionals are doing, with a very strong view about what good pedagogy looks like. And that I find more problematic, because in the end, I think one of the other massive problems that our school system has got is around the school workforce and the numbers of people leaving the profession. And if the result of the way we inspect is a culture of fear because of accountability, and a culture that undermines professionalism and the professionalism of teachers, because we are in classrooms forming these very high stakes judgments on the basis of a predetermined view of how you should teach things, instead of thinking about the outcomes and then using professional expertise as inspectors to perhaps to give an indication as to what people should do to get better outcomes, that would be an improvement conversation. But they're explicitly saying they don't want an improvement conversation. They want to report a snapshot of what they see, attach a single phrase judgment, and end up with a name and shame culture of fear.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to fix, isn't there? But you're dead right that it all joins up. Recruitment and retention is so clearly linked to Ofsted. Like in a very obvious sense, in some cases, where one of the last people who to appear on the podcast was a head teacher of a primary school in North London, a guy called Calvin Henry, who suffered very, very similar treatment to what happened at Caversham that happened later this year, and he's no longer teaching. He's left the profession specifically because of what happened. And so it's very clear that Ofsted are not helping the numbers on the retention side of things. And it just makes it go on.
Well, there was a really striking call into the Nicky Campbell show when the day we published our report. I was asked to go on his show on 5 Live, and a guy rang in and he said that his job now was delivering food for a food bank, which is an important and a noble thing for someone to do, and that he had been out doing his job, and they met another guy who was a former colleague who now also drives a van, and between them they had 60 years worth of classroom experience as teachers, and he ended the call by saying that Ofsted had ruined his life.
Oh my goodness.
And you kind of go, this is too common a story. That people have been driven out by what this culture is. I heard Vic Goddard on Newscast, BBC podcast. Other podcasts are available, and he, a head teacher in Essex, was talking about the impact on his mental health when he's been in the Ofsted window, and his partner, his family's saying, well, why do you do the job? And that's the question he asks himself every day whilst in that window and whilst going through all of that stress.
Yes.
Madness.
And also, just on this, I want to get into the inquiry, but just as one more point on this, there's also an effect that Ofsted has beyond the window and beyond what it does itself, which is the way that it has sort of created a teaching profession that it continually polices itself, where teachers are continually and leaders are often doing learning walks and lots of lesson observations and putting their teachers essentially like doing little mini Ofsteds, either as a department or practice Ofsteds. And I often used to use the metaphor of the panopticon, the idea of the prison where there's the prison guard can see into every cell, but the prisoners don't know whether they're being observed or not, but they behave as they're being observed the whole time. Ofsted has had a sort of a panopticon type effect across the system where teachers sort of always feel like they're under scrutiny, even if Ofsted has just been and it was a good judgment and there's like not really that much of a problem. It sort of has had an effect on the mindset of the profession that is also quite insidious, I think.
I think that's right. I was talking to someone during the course of doing the inquiry who trained and qualified in the United States and taught there, and then for personal reasons ended up here and ended up teaching here. And she just said, I don't even know if there was an inspector in America. No. Just wasn't part of the conversation. And she arrives in a primary school in this country, and that's all anyone will talk about. That is the professional conversation. Is what will Ofsted want? What have we got to? What's the performance that we've got to rehearse for?
Yeah, I know, and like there's quite a few head teachers that I've been in touch with have said like we're just talking about this way too much. Like imagine what else we could be talking about if it wasn't just taking up all of this bandwidth. So with the inquiry, what was involved? Like how many sessions did you have? How many people did you speak to? Were there surveys, interviews? Like what actually went into this thing?
So we had 4 academics from the UCL Institute of Education working on it. 2 of them, Jane Perryman and Alice Bradbury, are the authors of the report. So they actually did the hard graft at the keyboard. and they supervised both a quantitative survey of teachers and school leaders and people who wanted to respond to the survey online. They did the desktop research, looking at other people's surveying and other people's analysis of both Ofsted and off-school inspection systems. They did a desktop exercise looking at other jurisdictions around the world that I was particularly keen that we should be able to see, so that we can learn from what others are doing. And then they did a series of focus groups, and I also have been contacted by ex-chief inspectors, ex-chairs of Ofsted, people working in and who had been working as Ofsted inspectors for many years, and then others in the system, and we also engaged with some young people as well. And so lots of conversations, and we recorded all of those and fed them into the process, so that Jane and Alice in particular could tell us as an advisory board, and we met probably, 4 or 5 times, and the advisory board were made up of some serving heads, Alison Peacock from the Chartered School, some serving teachers, some other academics, a range of different people with expertise, and a nice diverse group of people. And so we were first of all able to think about the principles behind the inquiry, to be able to look at the surveying questions, make sure that we were asking the right questions, then look at the outcome and look at essentially what the system was saying about inspection at the moment, to look at the international examples, look at the alternatives as to how we might do things. And then I, in particular, started to synthesize things in discussion with Alison and Jane and 1 or 2 colleagues from the NEU around what I thought that the recommendations should be coming out of it. And then we had a board meeting to then kick those around and make sure that they were in keeping with the evidence that we'd heard, and that they weren't just my prejudices or anybody else's for that matter. And then, we agreed the text and job done.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you for that. And so the diagnosis is pretty damning. I'll just read a short paragraph in case anyone listening to this hasn't seen the report yet. It says, Ofsted is in need of major reform. Our research found that it is currently not seen as fit for purpose and as having a detrimental impact on schools, which some perceive as toxic. We acknowledge the need for quality assurance of schools, as any institution in receipt of public money should be subject to accountability. However, we need to build trust back into the system so that it can then work. The need for change is compelling and urgent. I don't know if you have this information at your fingertips, but could you sort of talk about some of the sources of information? What sort of led you to those very strong conclusions?
I think it was the very strong quantity of evidence from teachers and school leaders, both NEU members and non-NEU members, that they didn't, what their experience of the process was in terms of the stress and what it was doing to their attitude to their work, whether they thought that the findings were valid, whether they thought that they were consistent, whether they told them anything new. We then, Parent Kind had also done some surveying around the issue with parents, so we were also able to look at their data and find a judgment as to whether or not parents valued what Ofsted did, because it's a key defence that Ofsted use, is that this is really important information for parents. Well, if parents themselves are saying that it's not humane and it's not giving them, and that the single phrase judgment in particular is not helpful, then it's another argument for change. And so if the people is supposed to be designed to help, parents are saying, we don't really like it. If the other people it's designed to help, which are school leaders telling them what they don't already know, are saying, well, it's not telling us anything that we don't already know, then what's it there for? Then it's only there for accountability purposes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if it's only there for accountability purposes, then there are better things we can do.
It's interesting, that point, isn't it? When people talk about the one-word judgment, Ofsted often says parents like it, they use it, they rely on it. But then if you look at, there was some research that was done recently. I believe, was it Sam Sims and Christian Bockhover and some other people, and they looked at it, and like in nearly half of cases, the Ofsted report is out of date. So there's like new leadership in place by the time the parents are reading it.
Yeah.
And also that those one-word judgments were in no way a reliable predictor as to the future performance or outcomes at the school. And so they are providing information to parents, but it seems to be pretty crap information. Like it's not valid, it's not lasting, it's out of date. And likewise, the information that they're feeding to the regulator is of the same quality. And so they are providing information to parents, but as you say, like the quality of that data leaves something to be desired currently.
Yeah, it's possible to say, well, look, the whole report is published. Parents can read the whole report if they're interested. But I think we all know that, lots of schools stick up the bloody banners with outstanding or good with outstanding features or whatever they say.
Yeah.
And we kind of know that everyone's busy, and if they, in particular, if a school requires improvement or is inadequate, then that's all parents will hear. And if it's good, then some parents will read the report. If it's outstanding, they're going to go, oh, well, it's an outstanding school. They don't really need to read anymore. But and we're all a bit lazy. And if you don't offer that single word, and then people are going to go, okay, well, let's have a quick look. And even if all they did was look at 4 words and say, okay, quality of education is good, and the quality of leadership is fine, and and they look at the summary across 4 or 5 headings, that's better.
Yeah, it would be better, but even then, people would say, "Oh well, we're good all across the board," and that would become the new outstanding. I
know, and in the end, I think it's where we want to get to, and we're a way away, but where we want to get to is I want to be able to say, okay, I know my child. How's a child like mine going to do in that school, or how is my child doing in that school? How's the school doing for my child? It's so, and we will get there in the world of AI. We will understand individuals a lot better, and we'll understand their characteristics and what people with similar characteristics do and how they're doing in different environments. And we will get there, and that'll be much more interesting. And so the idea that my child, my mixed race child with particular talents and particular needs, is going to go to a school because it's good. Good for who?
Yeah, right. Good at what? Yeah, because schools are complicated things. They're very complex. Like just from a social research, perspective, the idea that you can reliably capture something as complicated as a school on a 4-point scale. Like if you submitted to an Ofsted report to an education research journal worth its salt, they just throw it out because they're like, well, that methodology is ridiculous. But it's interesting what you said about the scale and how. We need to be careful about, like I say, in this important moment that we seem to be entering as to where we can reconfigure this, that we don't sort of reintroduce these perverse incentives by the back door. And I noticed that in the recent report that the IPPR just published in the same month as yours, it was last month, November, they said that they would like to trial a new 3-tier response, which would either be school-led improvement, I think that's basically like the best one, enhanced support is like a little bit on the naughty step, and then immediate action. But even then it says inspection judgment shouldn't act as an automatic trigger to intervention. So they're saying that they would classify something as needing immediate action, but that's not a trigger. So that doesn't really follow through. But again, that would just reintroduce the scale system. And likewise, for a while with this group, this Education Policy Alliance group I've been working with, we thought about it would be nice to have a sort of a color-coded report card or data dashboard or however you want to describe it. Something a bit like, the stuff that you get on the front of a packet of crisps and it's like red for salt. You're like, okay, so I get that. But again, green across the board would become the new outstanding. And I was thinking maybe numerical data, because you do want stuff that you can eyeball. And so if there was numerical data, if like on the data dashboard thing, we sort of came up with this idea that you would have like, so it's, attainment and gaps. You could have a score out of 10 that you could figure out. Social sciences could work this out, like for breadth of curriculum, how, like, what's the offer here? So there are some schools that only offer about 5 subjects as options, and they do very well because they've got such a narrow curriculum. But those schools wouldn't, compare so well if you were looking at breadth of curriculum. The diversity of the intake, teacher retention, pupil retention, you could quite easily convert those ideas, even pupil satisfaction, parent and teacher satisfaction, extracurricular offer. You could convert those things into a sort of a numerical scale, and you could say, so this is an 8 for extracurricular offer, and the national average is a 6. So you could have some sort of like a way that you could eyeball the data and get a sense as to what's important for you. SEND provision is rated really highly at this school. If you're a parent of an SEND child and you think, well, that's the one for me. So I think that you could have some ways of providing data that you can sort of get a handle on the school at a snapshot without reintroducing this scaling problem.
Yeah, I'm just frantically looking through my emails from a guy called Timo Hane, who runs a really interesting education data business. And Timo, with The Guardian, I think, produced a sort of education school sort of data website thing, which is still up and running, and it's great. It does exactly that. It takes publicly available data about schools, and you can, as a user, you can cut it in various ways. You can decide what's important to you when thinking about the schools in your area, and then it'll show you, and it'll also show you from the point of view of the workforce and some of those other things, and that kind of thing. So it's not a static report card. That's one of the reasons why I don't like the report card idea. Is it doesn't imply anything quite as dynamic enough. But the opportunities are fantastic.
I agree. I think I've seen that thing. It's something that, like, I was quite surprised. Somebody showed it me a few months ago, and I was like, I can't believe I've never heard of this. But I think I'm familiar with it. And that could be administered remotely. You don't have to do lots of inspections to update the report card. Well, I think that you do need, when there is an inspection, and I think that there do still need to be school visits. That could be to partly to check the veracity of the data that's being reported, to check the record keeping and what have you. Yeah,
it's called theschoolsguide.com for those people who want to look at it.
Right.
But I mean, I like the idea that you still have a human commentary on it, because we can't capture everything in data. And there are some aspects of context, there are some aspects in particular of what a school improvement partner can do with the school leadership in sort of saying, well, there are reasons for why the data is so great or not so great. Here are the action plans around helping those that are not so great. There might be some action plans around things that are really extraordinary around helping other people, and we're going to take this expertise and we're going to support X and Y. But being able to share with parents, with the school community, with other interested parties, what the data means. It's not just what can we see, it's what's the story behind that and what we're going to do about it is just as important or more important than just a snapshot.
Totally agree. Yeah, it's qualitative as well as quantitative. And so let's get into some of the prescriptions. I totally agree with the diagnosis, as you might call it, and I think that it's very widely, the case for change is so strong. Let's get into the prescriptions. So the first thing, the first recommendation says every school will conduct its own self-evaluation, the school performance review, as you call it, which is a continuation of what currently happens, isn't it? Is there any sort of difference there between what you're calling the school performance review and school self-evaluation as it currently happens, or is that pretty similar so far?
It would be it would have a really strong relationship with the data we were just talking about with the report card thing,
Right.
and that we do think that centrally the government will want to have a view about what things should be reported in terms of data, and so the self-evaluation would be, okay, well, how do we think we're doing? How do we think we're doing in terms of our thinking about that data and what the outcomes say? And then that review is then something that's worked on with the school improvement partner. And there's an important aspect to this sense of self-evaluation, which is that's not the be-all and end-all. There is a tough end of accountability, both to parents through the data and through the publication of the action plan. And there is a tough end to it in terms of the governance of school improvement and whether or not the people responsible for the governance of the school are doing a good enough job in appointing the right people to do the school improvement partnership, to support the school leadership and to make sure that evaluation is valid.
Yeah. Okay. And so that brings us on to the second thing, which is that schools will work with an external school improvement partner, delivering on an action plan which is informed by the SEF, as it's currently called, the self-evaluation framework, or the school performance review. And so, who appoints the SIP? Is it the school or the trust, or is that sort of externally arranged? How would that work?
So we thought, James, about, well, should that person be appointed by Ofsted? And then we quickly decided that was a bad idea, because they would look a lot and be, in fact, a school inspector, and that would just change the dynamic in the wrong way. And so then it became obvious that should be something that's appointed by the governance of the school, and in most cases that would be the multi-academy trust or the local authority. Obviously there are other governance models are available, but in my mind, I was mostly designing for the multi-academy trust world. 80% of secondary schools are in that context. Over half of schools now are in multi-academy trust. So that's where my mind was at, and that the multi-academy trust board would appoint the school improvement partners. And what I'd love for them to be, actually, is serving school heads, so that we can then, and I borrowed this from international examples where you have peer accreditation, where serving heads come, and as part of their professional development, they spend some time looking at what other schools are doing as part of their quality assurance. And it becomes a self-improving system. There's a mutuality to it, which is really powerful.
I agree with that goal, for sure. The self-improving system and mutual support and so on. I think that the SIP, the school improvement partner, I have some questions about, just in terms of how that works. So, for example, you said that they would be appointed by the trust, but in the case of so if there's a single school that isn't in a trust, or there are some schools that are still in the local authority, and I know that there's a government target for every school. It's supposed to be every school becomes an academy by 2030, and then they've kicked that into the long distance, and it looks like the government won't be still the government next year or the year after, and so it's not really that clear. And so in the case of those individual standalone schools or in local authority schools, would the standalone school appoint their own SIP? And in that case, are they appointing just like a friendly face that they think is going to give them an easy ride? I think that there's a potential, but also I'll just ask one more question about the SIP, if you like, and then you can come in. The other thing is just about the quality of that person. It seems that a lot in this proposal rests on the quality of those school improvement partners. And where they're really strong, that would be great. But who would these people be, and how would we know whether they are good, unless problems arise sort of 2 or 3 years down the line? It just seems like that's potentially a weak link in this self-improving system as you describe it.
Sure. Well, there's a few questions in there. In terms of the single academy trust or the standalone school, yes, they would appoint their own, but they've been, coming on to the later recommendations, we're saying that we do think there is a role for Ofsted in inspecting the governance of these school groups and in particular, their governance of school improvement. So Ofsted would look at whether or not these SIPs have been appointed on the right basis, whether they had the right expertise to do the job and to provide the external support. And so if it was just your mate from down the road, my expectation is that Ofsted would look at that with some suspicion as to whether or not that is the appropriate person. It still might be, just because the person is your mate and just because they only live down the road doesn't necessarily mean they're the wrong person.
Indeed, absolutely.
It means you might want to look a little bit more closely at whether or not they've got the right expertise to really help.
And those SIPs, sorry, I'll let you finish and then I've got another question.
For the local authority, I think I don't regard them as any different to a MAT. They are responsible for a group of schools. They have the governance responsibility for a group of schools. It's be up to the local authority education committee or the portfolio cabinet member to appoint the SIPs, and they can be inspected on the basis of how well they've done that and whether or not they are properly looking at the data, looking at what's going on in that school and making a good judgment about how that school will best be supported in their improvement journey by an external partner. Now, who those people are is, there are a lot of experienced school heads still in school leadership. There are experienced former school heads in multi-academy trust management. There are experienced former heads in working for Ofsted, for that matter, who might not be in a job in a minute. There's a pool of people who can be used, and it's not like it's a full-time job. They would be going in and having a long-term relationship over 3 to 5 years with a school, and they would have several that they would potentially be looking after.
I see. Okay, so that was partly linked to the follow-up question that I had about you saying it's not a full-time job. So one of my questions is, like, who are these SIPs, and are they freelance? Who do they work for? Who pays them for their time? How, like, could there be a full-time SIP who's like looking after, say, I don't know, 60 schools or something, or 40 or however many? How would that work?
Perhaps it would help if I describe how the system of quality assurance for the Council of British International Schools works, which I also chair.
Right.
It's a similar sort of model. So in that case, each member school has a local improvement partner that is appointed. And that person is normally a serving head somewhere else who's been trained to do this work, is paid a little bit by the school that's being inspected in this case, in the international school case, but it's not a huge amount because they've got a salary elsewhere because they're a serving head teacher somewhere else. And then they have a relationship over a few years. When they do their concluding visit, they would be joined by 2 or 3 other serving heads as peer accreditors who would help them do the work, who, again, their travel and as a very, very modest fee is paid for by the school that's being inspected. But again, people aren't doing it for the money, they're doing it for the professional development, and they're getting a salary elsewhere. So it's not an expensive system. And I don't see why you couldn't have something similar in this case.
Right, but so who would pay for their time? Is it the school that pays for them to do their role? Would that come out of the school budget?
Yeah, it would be part of what the governance layer of the school would have to fund.
Right,
it's the school improvement partner function.
Okay, I see.
Frankly, they would be doing a lot of that already. A multi-academy trust, if they're worth anything, would already be engaging people to do school improvement work.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
It's an extra cost. It's just formalising some things that are already happening.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, within local authorities, I think it used to be more of a thing. There would be often school improvement partners, and it's not entirely a new thing. If I may, can I suggest an alternative vision because I totally agree we should have like local accountability and an external pair of eyes. I think that one of the problems that I have with the SIP idea is that it's just one person, and if they're the most brilliant person in the world, the super experienced, highly qualified, interpersonal skills, like everything, they tick every box. There's still only one person, and they only have the perspective of that one person. And I think that you could have an alternative way of holding schools to account as in partnership with another local school. Do you remember last week when we chatted offline, and I talked about this work I've been doing about implementation science and how we use these slice teams. So you take a slice through the organization. So I was thinking, I've got our little blurb here that we're drafting. So you'd have a school accountability partnership network, essentially, where a school will work in partnership with another school, or if there's an odd number in a particular area, they could be in a 3, to carry out reciprocal peer reviews annually, and they could do it over 2 days. Like, so each school would be reviewed 2 days by a local school, and also they would go and review another local school, say the following term. And that slice team the size of it would depend on the size of school, but it would typically involve a senior leader or the head teacher, the SENCO, teachers, school, support staff, governors, potentially parents. Although I think that you probably it would be difficult to include parents and pupils and so on. But certainly the parent governor, for example. Because then, and support staff, like teaching assistants, see so much stuff that teachers and school leaders don't see, and they would, go into lessons, and they would do the stuff that Ofsted, I think, are doing too much of, which is sort of getting they're getting their hands rolled up and having an opinion on pedagogy. They could go into lessons and they're looking at feedback and what have you, and they can do surveys and interviews with people, and then there would be a sort of format for the report that, based on this review visit, the school leaders, say the leadership team from the reviewing school, would write up a report that highlights strengths and areas for improvement around leadership, curriculum, behavior, attendance, mental health, SEND. So the stuff that Ofsted reports on, but also, you could have other things in there. Oracy, for example, looks like it's going to be a thing under Labour. So Oracy. So it would still give you that sort of local accountability partner, but I think that it would be a more robust system, because you would be looking at it from these multiple levels rather than it just resting on the quality of this one person.
Yeah, it might work. I think it's very interesting. There'll be some people have said to me, you can't have local neighbouring schools because too many are competitive with each other, particularly in an environment of falling roles, and they might try and mark their neighbour down in order to advantage them and so on. So, it might be that you want to have someone who is at least sufficiently out of area that they're not a competitor school.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, absolutely.
And certainly in urban settings, that might be an issue. In most rural settings, parental choices doesn't exist. You go to the local school, otherwise you're going to spend your life in a car. So,
that's the point. So if it's like a half-hour commute away, say, so that they're not right on it, absolutely, that would be an interesting thing. But also, I think that I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised if that was a big problem, just because of the professionalism of that school, and because like, if it was one senior leader who was going into a neighbouring school with an agenda, you could see how that could be sort of subverted. But because there are so many people involved in that review process, if they then went and wrote a report and they were like, hang on, that's not, I think that there would be sort of transparency within the process that would help to minimise that problem.
I guess what I'd love ultimately is a system where if what we're doing is moving the unit of inspection from the school to the school group. Yeah. And that when Ofsted come and inspect the school group and inspect the governance of it and the leadership of the group, and they go, okay, so really important for us is, what are you doing about school improvement? We can see the data. How are you addressing that? And if a school group came back and said, well, we've got this great scheme where we take a slice through each organisation, and we're teamed up with some other schools or other school groups, and we're and we've got this self-improving system of school improvement supporting each other, and this is how we're doing it, and explain the whole system. And the inspectors could see that the governance properly understood what they were trying to do in terms of school improvement, that they were having an effect. The data showed that the progress that they were making, that they were drawing on a wealth of experience, much better than a single school improvement partner, so that they could deal with issues with their SEND population, they could deal with issues with their EAL population, they could deal with issues in that particular subject and that particular subject. So you're drawing on a wealth of experience. And they said, this is fantastic. I'd love that. I'd love it if we didn't say, oh, you've got to do it this way. I would love it if we were just saying, we want a robust quality assurance system that's got improvement and support at the heart of it. And then we will inspect how the governance of that to make sure that that's being done properly, and it's not just your mates, and it's not marking your own homework. It is robust and stands up to some scrutiny. That would be great.
Yeah, totally. And so there will still be an Ofsted under your proposals, and they will still do inspections, but they will be slimmed down and they'll be looking at that governance stuff. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we've said separate off safeguarding. That's too important to leave to every few years. There should be annual safeguarding visits that are about compliance. And one day, local authorities might have the capacity and capability once more to be able to do that. But for now, let's set up a national safeguarding authority that can have a consistent definition of safeguarding and consistently quality assure the safeguarding compliance visits. So that then left, well, what does Ofsted do? We do think there is an important role beyond the themed subject reports that they do, which we think are really valuable, and some of the other things that they do that are valuable that you talked about earlier on, that school groups should come under their watch now, and that actually there's a little bit of me as a sort of recovering politician thinking about the Treasury end of the discussion.
Yeah, and I was wondering that. Go on.
At the Treasury end of the discussion, if we all agree, annual safeguarding visits, well, great, but that's got to be funded.
Yeah.
And if you're then saying, and we're going to have Ofsted carry on inspecting every school every 3 or 4 years for the quality of education end of it, that's quite a significant extra cost, especially if you're going to do it well and properly resource it.
Yeah.
So there's also a degree of pragmatism about saying, actually, move the unit of inspection up from 25,000 schools to 2,000 or 3,000 groups. That then becomes affordable.
So you're inspecting at the level of the trust or local authority rather than at the level of individual schools.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how it would be more affordable, but it feels like things would like the individual schools could fall through the cracks and not be seen. I think based on so this alternative thing that we've been working up, and there's lots of overlap with the Beyond Ofsted suggestions. So we've sort of suggested that we should replace Ofsted with a schools governance auditor and make it about audit. Like no head teacher would have a problem with an auditor, but the whole inspection thing is a problem. So this schools governance auditor would perform 3 functions. One of them would be to visit and report on safeguarding, like you say. You're saying that would be done by another organisation. We suggest biennially, so like every other year, rather than because at the moment it's every 3 or 4 years. Going from that to every year is a big leap, and I think that you could make a case for every other year, as a sort of as a hybrid, and because that's much slimmed down, you would only need 2 people, I think, to do those inspections, like a senior auditor and say an assistant auditor. So you've only got a team of 2, so the wage bill comes down a lot, and they could do that in one day rather than 2 days. So they could cover more schools in less time with fewer people, and so that would save a lot of money. And the data dashboard, I mean, looking at that schools, I have seen it before. I think we just reinvented a thing that already exists. That schools guide is amazing. Like I just eyeballed it when you mentioned it. That does exactly what. So bring that in. So that already exists. So the data dashboard, and that sort of can be administered remotely by some desk bots. That doesn't seem like it would cost that much money. And then to coordinate this network of school accountability partnerships, I think that you would have to have like a little online training module so that the people who do that. I've done something quite similar to that. I used to do a thing called research informed peer review. RIPPER, it was called. That was when I was at the Institute of Education. And it was exactly like that. You'd make slice teams from we would have 3 or 4 schools, and it was often themed around feedback. And we would go into neighboring schools and we'd observe lessons and, interview kids and interview teaching assistants and parents and leaders and what have you. And then we'd sort of write it up afterwards. And it worked really well. And I think that it would be good to have a bit of training, right? So there's like some consistency in terms of like, here's how to ask good interview questions. They should randomize use random sampling so that they randomly ask for, in interviews with teaching assistants, with teachers, randomly observe, X number of lessons so that they're getting a nice sample that isn't just cherry picked. But that's, that would be hugely beneficial for those schools to take part in for their own professional development, to go into those other schools and to see what's going on. And out of a whole school year, I think that you could make the case for 2 days, there'd be a bit of, I suppose that some lessons would need to be covered, but that feels affordable. And so it feels like if you don't do that sort of setting up a separate body that does annual safeguarding visits, but if you keep that within this same organization, but you do it every other year and with this slimmed down thing, it feels to me that wouldn't necessarily be any more expensive than what happens currently under Ofsted's budget.
Possibly, but I suppose more positively about the school group level. If I were inspecting a school group, I would want to see the data that they're looking at for each one of the schools in the trust or in the local authority, what they're looking at within, if you like, the silo of the school, and then how those silos then connect horizontally. So, what does SEND look like across the piece? What does attendance look like across the piece? What does attendance for those with SEND look like across the piece? You can look at the data in all sorts of different ways. And I'd want to see the evidence as to how the governance was looking at all of that and how it was monitoring and understanding what was going on in each of the schools. And there would be a trail around that. And then saying, well, that school and that school look on the face of it, on the data, like there's some problems. So I'm going to just drill in a little bit more in terms of understanding then what the improvement work has been with each of those 2 schools, and you drill into it that way. Now, yes, you might fit things, and I'm kind of making it up as I go along a little bit in this conversation as to how I might go about inspecting it. But I think I've thought for a long time in all of my public service that things go wrong when the governance goes wrong, and that we don't pay enough attention to governance, and there's not enough of a conversation about governance. And if we get the governance right, if we've got a group of people who are asking the right questions about the right things consistently, and they're thinking about risk in the right way, not minimizing all risk, but taking decisions, understanding the risks that they're taking, then it's very difficult for bad things to happen. You can be unlucky and unfortunate things happen, but systemic problems don't arise because you've got a good governance system in place.
I wish I shared your I agree with a lot of what you said. I just think that like that whole thing about good intentions, leading to hell. I think that when you have a system of high accountability, and even if you got rid of Ofsted, we've still got league tables, we've still got bums on seats, and school budgets are dependent on how many put them down as a first choice and all the rest of it. And there is some dodgy stuff that happens in schools currently. Since the academy's so-called revolution, there's been lots of, like a loss of transparency, a loss of accountability, lots of financial irregularities and strange goings on, lots of off-rolling. And those people, I think, the people who off-roll kids, I think that I've spoken to people who've done that, and they've sort of said, well, it's in the best interest for those kids. They're not doing well here. They're better off in some other institution. They're dragging back the other kids who are trying to get by. They frame it in a way that they see themselves as good actors, but they are doing things that arguably are questionable. And so I think that,
which is all the more reason to inspect them.
I agree. Yeah. But I would stick to the school level personally. I think that the trust level, again, because trusts are competing with other trusts and so on. And I don't know. I think that, I'm totally with you on the focus on governance. I think on these, what we're proposing would be biennial governance and safeguarding audits, essentially. So you'd be looking, and I think that you would do it on 7 days notice so that you can give time for, like, if you send out an anonymous questionnaire to parents, to teachers, to kids, so that you can capture really up-to-date information, and that would give the auditors time to review that data and then to come in, to look at safeguarding. Absolutely, that still needs to happen, the practices and the records around that. Secondly, to investigate or to explore any issues that have been raised in these pre-visit surveys. And I think that the other bit is just to look at the accuracy of record keeping, linking back to what we said about that data dashboard, just to look at like staff retention. Let's have a look at your figures. Let's have a look at your school budget, just basic, like the basics of governance, just like, are you keeping accurate records? Can we have faith in your data? And in that case, I would butt out of all of those conversations around, behavior and, Ofsted defining learning as a change in the long-term memory, and these things that are very contested in the research. They need to butt out of that stuff and leave that to the schools, to the people who live and breathe that work every day. So I think there's lots of overlap with what you're talking about, for sure. But let's see how this plays out in the weeks to come. It'll be interesting.
It'll be interesting, and it's what's exciting is that I think change is definitely coming. I'm meeting later today with the chair of the select committee. They're looking at Ofsted at the moment as well. They'll produce a report. There are, I think, regardless of the politics, almost the new chief inspector and then whoever's in power after the election, there will be some further change and some moves in our direction. Whether they'll go the whole hog, I don't know. But what's exciting is that we can lift this burden on the profession of the culture of fear and turn it into something more supportive.
Yeah, totally. Just as a final question on this, and then I want to move on to asking about other things. The Ofsted brand. So the coroner's inquest into Ruth Perry's death, that they reported after your thing came out, didn't they? And now that they've reported that Ofsted were culpable, that they directly contributed to what happened, so tragic and not unique. Has your opinion changed since then on the Ofsted brand and whether actually we need to, like, the brand has become so toxic that we need to just call it something else?
Well, if I were Martin Oliver coming in on the 1st of January as the new chief inspector, that would be one of the first things I would be looking at, is doing some work on the brand and whether a rebranding is part of the way forward. Now, a rebranding on its own is not enough. You can, if it's lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. But if you are then doing some other things to change, and if you then believe that you still won't get the credit for that change if the same old branding is attached to it, then you might make the decision that the Office for Standards in Education is going to have to be called something other than Ofsted.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. All right. Thank you for that. I'm really, really fascinated, and congratulations on the report. It's a brilliant piece of work. All power to your elbow, and let's see what happens in the coming weeks. So let's pivot to you. One thing that I really like to do in these conversations is to get to know the person, because I think that we often miss that out in these conversations. We're sort of talking across each other without really thinking, who are you and why do you think about this? And I know that you've been, involved in education stuff for many years, but I'd like to take you right back to the beginning, if I may, and your own experience of school. What kind of school did you go to? What kind of a student was the young Jim Knight?
Well, the very first school that I went to, I've got one or two memories of, which was a convent school in Derbyshire. And then I'm told that because we moved to Wolverhampton as a family and lived there for a year. And I'm told I did go to a school in Wolverhampton, but I had absolutely no memory of it whatsoever. But my mum has recently told me that that school thought that I had special educational needs and that I was a problem. And it amuses me that they clearly didn't like me and I have no memory of it. So
what age were you when you were there?
I'd have been about 6.
Okay, so quite old to not
Yeah.
have any memories at all. That's interesting.
And then I went to to Brooklands Primary School in Blackheath because we moved down there. And then my parents decided that we should go to a private school. So we went to Elton College, so I spent 10 years at that school in South East London.
Right.
And actually I had a really good time. I was not a hardworking student. I was someone who relied on my natural talent and bullshitting abilities to get by. As a 12, 13-year-old, I was in Oliver in the West End for 6 months and loved that and sort of fell in love really with acting and sort of showing off on the stage,
right.
which I did a little bit, after university as theatre, and then I did a lot as a politician of that, standing on a stage and showing off. That's clearly what entertains me.
Who were you in Oliver?
Well, I understudied the Artful Dodger,
right,
and then my role was a character called Charlie Bates.
Right, there you go. Interesting. And was that a boys' school or co-ed, Eltham?
It was a boys' school. We had girls in the sixth form.
Right. Okay. And then your later educational journey. What happened next?
Well, the school did what it's designed to do, which is get as many people into as good a university as possible in the traditional sense of that. So my brother is 3 years ahead of me, and I were the first in our family to go to university. We both went to Cambridge, and I studied geography for 2 years and a year of social and political science. But I say that loosely because I carried on not really studying. I went there with an exhibition, which I quickly lost because I didn't do well enough in the end of year exams because I was spending all my time in theatre. I did as much acting as I could, variety of different roles, from a few Shakespearean roles, Don Pedro and Much Ado About Nothing, Edmund in King Lear, etc., all the way through to Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. So the whole spread of things. And in my final year, going into my final year, a friend and a colleague in my year, Sam Mendes, got a group of us together and said that we should form a theatre company rather than us all go to drama school. And so a group of us, instigated by Sam, formed a theatre company that then employed me when I graduated for a few years. But then I started a family and went into arts centre management and became a promoter before then deciding I wanted to be a politician.
Interesting. Okay, there you go. So you were in a theatre company with Sam Mendes.
Yeah, and a guy called Tom Hollander.
Of course, yeah.
And our set designer was a guy called Tom Piper, who if you remember the Poppies in the Tower, he was the designer behind that, and he was and designed for the RSC, and was a associate director at the RSC for a long time, and a bunch of other really great, talented people, and then me.
And so another question that I'm really interested in is this idea of significant learning, which is an idea that comes from Carl Rogers originally, the psychotherapist who sort of was interested in like learning that shapes you as a person. What have been the sort of the important things that have most shaped you in your life? I suspect that this might touch upon your decision to become a politician, because that seems like quite a significant thing to do. But what comes to mind as you think about, well, like, what are the moments that have most shaped you?
Well, this is the sort of therapy end of the discussion, isn't it? I mean, I think I'm a pleaser. I'm someone who likes to be liked and who likes to please other people. And I think that comes from my childhood, very busy parents and getting their attention was quite hard. I was sort of unambiguously loved and cuddled by my mum's mum, by Nana. And, my mum's own admission, she wasn't one to really show emotion or to be physically demonstrative for me as a child. And I think there's something in that as to why I'm always wanting to make everyone happy around me, and I'm unhappy when I can't make everyone happy, if you see what I mean. And then there's also a part of me that is willing to stick my head above the parapet and advocate for people and want to do public service. And I think that is, it's hard to, I mean, there would be parts of my education. I do think I had a really good education at Eltham. So parts of it will be that, but certainly not that many of my school friends went on into forms of public service. One did become an Ofsted inspector, certainly. But my dad also had cancer twice during my childhood. Was given 6 months to live twice. He survived, and that was an important part of my journey growing up as well. And I was protected from a lot of that by my brother and by my mother, but there would be a part of me that would have looked at how people rally around to help people who are in need. In that case, it was my dad and my family, and wanting to do a bit of that, I think. And then finally, Oliver was really important. Oliver was a chance to learn and work with kids from all over London, from every background, rather than privileged kids going to a South East London private school. And it was a really formative experience in terms of giving me a confidence to perform, but a confidence socially with people, regardless of who they are.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Like lots of the work that I do is around oracy. And that's something that I notice a lot, that when you teach kids that how to stand on a stage, for example, oracy isn't just about performing, but it's about getting the confidence to communicate with anybody. But once they get that, it's totally transformational. It's not just like learning a skill, like learning to juggle. It changes you. It changes how you think about yourself, about what you could go on to do. Yeah. Changes how other people perceive you. It's really powerful.
And if you develop those skills, and I do think they're developable in anyone, a big part of it is listening. Because if you want to please people, you've got to understand them, and to understand them, you've got to listen to them. So you listen really acutely to and watch body language, and you're looking for all the signals as to what is it, what do these people need to be happy, and the listening is, I think, the most important part of oracy, actually.
Totally. And also the most overlooked part. People often focus on that, like grandstanding, debating, doing a speech, jazz hands stuff. But yeah, absolutely. And so so you were interested in public service, but what was it that led you to run for Parliament? Was there a sort of a galvanizing moment?
In a way, I blame Margaret Thatcher. That towards the end of her premiership, I was just so frustrated with the way the country was being run, how unfair it seemed, how whole communities were being abandoned by the brutalism of her industrial policy, her energy policy, and the mines and everything else. And at the same time, I was living in a market town called Warminster in Wiltshire. That was a sort of army town, really. And all the local politicians were of a similar complexion politically to Mrs. Thatcher. And I just had enough. And I just wanted better. And there was a threat to one of the 3 wards in our local hospital in Warminster, and I played a big part in the campaign to keep that ward for elderly mentally ill patients open as part of doing my bit for the town. And I really enjoyed leading a successful campaign like that. And sort of drifted in then to thinking, actually, a lot of my work in theatre had been about social change. We did a lot of new writing in that theatre company that Sam started, and that was social commentary. But the 80s was full of amazing cultural activity with a political message. Spitting Image and Harry Enfield and all those people and Ben Elton, they all had a political message. Didn't change the way anyone voted.
No.
So I decided in the end to get stuck in and knock on doors and try and change the way people voted. And
so were you? So I believe is it true that you're the only Labour MP to have ever won in Dorset?
In a general election, yeah. There was a guy, literally Guy Barnett, who got elected in the early 60s in Dorset South in a by-election. The Tories were split over Europe, and a by-election came up, and he managed to win it, but he lost it at the following general election. Went on to be an MP for Greenwich, but I got elected. I lost in '97 by 77 votes, closest loser in the country, having been 17,000 votes behind and in third place. So part of that sort of Tony Blair wave in the New Labour thing in '97.
Oh, so you almost got in '97, but then did you get in '92 or something?
So I stuck with it and got in 2001.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, 2001. Sorry, I got my decades wrong there. Okay, right.
Yeah, and then got re-elected in 2005 as well.
Yeah, you never know, that record might be broken or equaled rather in the next election. So. Who knows? It looks like Dorset's looking like it might change colour. That would be nice.
Yeah. I hope so.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and so. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. It's always fascinating to understand the journeys that people have been on, and you don't hear that often, do you?
No, you don't. And different people have thought about it differently, and they'll have different vulnerabilities, and their willingness to share it is different. But I think about it quite a lot, partly because I'm in the business of thinking about how we help children develop to lead successful lives, and I think reflecting on your own child is a part of then thinking about how children grow up.
Yes. And so one final question on this, and then we'll do the rethinking education part. And it's just about, like, in your role as a politician, like you've done lots in education. What is it that sort of that made you go in that direction?
Yeah, so I was schools minister for 3 years.
Yeah.
Under Blair and then Brown, and that was my sort of first relationship with this. I then had a year as employment minister in Gordon's cabinet, and then afterwards I then went and got a job with TES, and I was in the senior leadership at TES for 5-6 years, and then I've been doing various other things for various people since. But education remains a passion. In many ways, because I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think it's more interesting than that. It's a profoundly human endeavor with all the variability of different people in different communities, different contexts. different backgrounds of the children and the learners, different backgrounds of the teachers, and finding the right way to fire people and to get the best out of them is as much of an art as it is a science, and it remains forever fascinating as the world keeps changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's come on to these final 3 questions. This is the rethinking education part, and the first one is positives. What are we getting right currently? And you might want to come back to inspections and accountability here, or you might think of something completely else. So what's good? What do you like the look of? What would you like to boost the signal of? The second question is, what do you think are the major challenges that we face currently? And again, that could be around inspection, or it could be around education more widely, or even societally or globally. You can answer that question on whichever level you choose. And the last one is, how might we fix that challenge? What do you think we need to do more of or less of?
So the first question, look, what I love and what I want more of, I went back to a school called Brentcroft Primary in Brent last Friday, run by a wonderful woman called Andrea, who was Jamaican born and trained, and has been worked in secondary and is now running a primary school. Most of her staff are migrants, 97% EAL in her school, so virtually all of the kids are migrants, lots of Afghans, lots of Syrians. And I just loved and love in the end, actually, it's the love in that school. Every child in that school knows that there is an adult in their lives who unambiguously loves them, despite the difficult time that many of them have had and the difficult journeys that they've been on, and the appalling housing and some of the appalling poverty that they are experiencing. They're at a school that really cares for them, with a staff, most of whom are migrants themselves, who reflect them and are leading them beautifully in learning. They do voluntary reading where year sixes come in on a Saturday morning, 10 till 12, to help their reading buddies in year 1 and 2 with their reading. And that wouldn't happen if the culture of love and care for each other was not there and running like coursing through the veins of that school. And I want more of that.
Beautiful.
And then the challenge. Look, I was looking at something today. Pearson published something last week around their judgment around how AI is going to change work, and 30% by 2032, 30% of the white collar work that we do at the moment will be done by AI, by their calculation. Very little of the blue collar work will change. We've got an education system currently that's orientated very much around helping people into white collar work, much of it which will be displaced by technology. We today published for a select committee report for the Lords 11-16 Education Committee, where we talk about the need to, as chaired by Joe Johnson, Tory Peer, Kenneth Baker, and Margaret Thatcher as Education Secretary, all agree that we need to broaden the curriculum, and knowledge rich is important, but it results in technologically, vocationally, and emotionally poor. And we have to rebalance that. And we have to do that as quickly as the workforce can cope with it, which might not be that quick. And how we do that, look, I think that then goes back to the constraint on that change is a little bit of it's one, political leadership. Perhaps we can address that at the next election, but it is also the capacity of the workforce to change. And so we have to stop doing some things, and we have to grow some capacity in the workforce. And I think we can do a lot by changing aspects of the accountability system. Get rid of EBAC, as we've said today in that report. Get rid of some of the testing that we overly do in primary school and reallocate some of that resource elsewhere. Change the inspection system. So just free up teachers, build trust in the profession, flip the culture away from a culture of fear to a culture of trust and professionalism. And then I think the workforce reconnecting with their intrinsic motivation to be teachers will be up for some of the change that we then want to do.
Yeah, my goodness. That is like not just music to my ears, that's like a symphony of music to my ears. That's a beautiful thing to hear. And on the knowledge-rich point, I think that some people would listen to what you just said and bristle, and I've seen that already today in some of the response to that 11 to 16 review that's just come out. People are saying, oh, they're misunderstanding knowledge, they're just dismissing it as rote and so on. And I think that the knowledge-rich argument is an important one that needed to be made at that time. And I think that the people who advocate for that are half right. Knowledge is super, super important. And I think previously, do you remember the PLTS framework, the personal learning and thinking skills framework? And there was all this talk in the Labour administration of the skills development, as though you could sort of develop creativity or criticality, say, as though they sort of float free of a knowledge base. And obviously that's not the case. Like if you want to reform the tax system, you need to know a lot about the tax system in order to think creatively or critically about how to solve it. Like knowledge is super important. And so the knowledge-rich people are half right. And I would be very wary of a Labour administration coming in and sort of just swinging the pendulum back in the other direction. It's important to maintain the gained ground that has been made there. But I agree that what is knowledge-rich is often poor in other ways. Knowledge of self, for example, is often not really talked about in a knowledge-rich curriculum. And to my mind, that's the most important thing of all. Like, who are you? What are your goals? How do you fit in the world? What is it about you that makes you you? And how can you, have some sort of say over what happens in your life? The way that education is sort of done to children is so dehumanizing that they sort of just feel lost and they don't feel like they really come alive until after school. And we could do a lot to fix that.
It was really striking with the PISA results that after Turkey, the UK children have got the worst sense of their own life experience of anyone in the Western world.
Yeah,
and that's really grim. That's really grim. And so that sense of self, I think, is truly important. When we were taking evidence in that select committee, the Institute of Physics came along, Royal Society, saying the curriculum's so cluttered with stuff that you have to learn that they don't have time to teach the big ideas. So there's big ideas of knowledge that we can't communicate, and we can't communicate the relevance. I was helping Coco with her homework, year 8 student with y equals mx plus c for maths, and she had no idea why that's important. No idea of the relevance of that. That it's the core concept behind AI is y equals mx plus c, and to teach that's the core prediction engine for all of the data analysis that she might do in later life, and that it's the basis therefore of AI. It's not there in the narrative because they haven't got time to do that because they've got to get through all the stuff, and that's what we want to free up.
I recognize that for sure as a former science teacher, recovering science teacher. We used to talk about it. It's like an ocean of knowledge that's about an inch deep. Like there's just so much to cover, but there's no depth to any of it. So you really don't get really that interested in it and as a subject because you're not wrestling with the sort of the unknown stuff. Everything's just presented as a fait accompli. And it's like, where's the struggle? What was it like to not know this? Let's talk about the stories of the scientists who discovered this stuff. I totally agree. Well, I think that we're almost out of time here, aren't we? So all that remains is to say a massive thank you, Jim. It's been really lovely to spend some time with you, to get to know you a little. As I said, just hugely well done on this report. I think it's very, very good indeed. This is an important piece of work that's landed at a very opportune moment. Absolutely all power to you in helping to get these recommendations onto the statute.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your work on it as well.
Let's rethink education.